What does it take to be the absolute worst? To not just mess up, but to leave a legacy of total disaster? We're not talking about one bad law or a few angry tweets. We're talking about presidents who drove America off a cliff. From fumbling the Great Depression, to stealing from wounded veterans, to literally doing nothing while the country burned to the ground. These are the shocking stories of the worst leaders in American history, the ones historians always rank at the rock bottom. Get ready, because we're counting down the presidents who, through incompetence, corruption, or just straight-up betrayal, will forever be infamous. These aren't just bad presidents. They are the ultimate cautionary tales. Section 1. The countdown begins. The dishonorable mentions. Before we hit the true bottom of the barrel, a few names always pop up in the lower ranks. They weren't the worst of the worst, but their failures were big enough to get them in the history books for all the wrong reasons. Coming in at number 10, we have John Tyler. Tyler became president in 1841 after William Henry Harrison died just 30 days into his term, earning him the amazing nickname, His Accidency. This was the first time a VP had to take over, and Tyler's power move to declare himself the full president set a huge precedent. But that's where the good news stops. Tyler was a former Democrat who ran with the Whig Party. Once he was in charge, his ideas clashed so badly with the Whigs that his entire cabinet quit in protest, except for one guy. He became a president with no party, and Congress fought him on everything. He was the first president to face an impeachment resolution and the first to have a veto overridden. His presidency was just a 4-year-long political fistfight that left the whole country stuck in place. At number 9, we find Millard Fillmore, another accidental president who took over after Zachary Taylor died in 1850. Fillmore's presidency is totally dominated by one single catastrophic law, the Compromise of 1850. It was supposed to cool down tensions between slave states and free states, but it did the exact opposite. The worst part was the Fugitive Slave Act, which forced people in the North to help catch escaped slaves. Fillmore thought enforcing this law was his job, but in doing so, he absolutely enraged the North. He treated slavery like a political headache to be managed, not the profound moral crisis it was. His own party was so disgusted they refused to nominate him for a second term. His compromise only made the Civil War more certain. Our number 8 spot goes to Herbert Hoover. Hoover had the unbelievable bad luck of taking office in 1929, just months before the stock market crash that kicked off the Great Depression. Now, he didn't cause the crash, but his response was a complete failure. Hoover was a big believer in American individualism and thought direct federal aid would make people lazy. As millions lost their jobs, shantytowns bitterly nicknamed Hoovervilles popped up everywhere. His administration's most infamous move was the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act in June 1930, which jacked up taxes on imports. It was meant to protect American jobs, but instead sparked a global trade war that made the Depression even worse. While he wasn't totally hands-off, he did eventually sign the Emergency Relief Construction Act in 1932, which allowed states to borrow money for relief projects. It was far too little, far too late. For millions of starving citizens, his efforts were a joke, and his inability to adapt his rigid ideology sealed his legacy. And at number 7, we have George W. Bush. In recent historian surveys, he lands in the bottom tier of presidents. A 2024 poll ranked him 32nd overall. His presidency is defined by two massive events, the 9/11 attacks and the wars that followed, and the 2008 Great Recession. While he was praised for his leadership right after 9/11, his choice to invade Iraq in 2003, based on the false claim that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, is seen as one of the biggest foreign policy blunders in modern history. The war destabilized the Middle East and cost trillions of dollars. Back home, his administration was slammed for its slow and incompetent response to Hurricane Katrina in 2005. His presidency ended with the 2008 financial crash, the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, which many critics say was caused by his deregulation policies. Section 2, the bottom 5, entering the abyss. Now we're in the real Hall of Shame. Historians see these next 5 presidents as having done deep, lasting damage to the United States. Their names are synonymous with national disaster. Coming in at number 5 is a very recent and controversial one, Donald Trump. In the latest 2024 surveys of presidential historians, Trump is ranked as the single worst president in U.S. history. So why dead last? Historians point to a few things. First, his administration's chaotic response to the COVID-19 pandemic, where he downplayed the virus and pushed unproven treatments. Second, his presidency was filled with scandals and a disregard for political norms. But for scholars, the most damaging event was his repeated false claim that the 2020 election was stolen, which led to his role in the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. This attempt to stop the peaceful transfer of power was an assault on American democracy itself, a line no president had ever crossed. Historians argue these actions have done lasting damage to the presidency and to public trust. But none of that was as bad as our number 4 pick, Warren G. Harding. Harding's presidency is the gold standard for corruption. He looked like a president, but he was completely out of his league, and he knew it. He once said, "I am not fit for this office and should have never been here." He was right. His administration, which only lasted from 1921 until he died in 1923, was overrun by his poker buddies, the Ohio Gang, who he gave powerful government jobs. The most famous scandal was Teapot Dome, where his Secretary of the Interior, Albert Fall, was caught leasing government oil reserves to private companies for huge bribes. Fall became the first cabinet member in history to go to prison. Another one of his buddies, Charles Forbes, was caught stealing millions of dollars meant for wounded World War I veterans. While Harding wasn't personally convicted of anything, his terrible judgment and lack of oversight created one of the most corrupt administrations ever. Section 3, the truly catastrophic. We've seen corruption and incompetence, but these next 3 guys took failure to a level that nearly broke the entire country. Cracking the top 3 is Franklin Pierce. Serving from 1853 to 1857, Pierce was weak, indecisive, and a total disaster. His presidency was a direct ramp-up to the Civil War. He was a Northerner who was weirdly sympathetic to the South, and his biggest failure was championing the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. This law let settlers in new territories vote on whether to allow slavery. The result was pure horror. Pro- and anti-slavery forces flooded into Kansas and started killing each other in a mini-civil war known as Bleeding Kansas. Instead of calming things down, Pierce had lit the country on fire. He saw fighting slavery as a threat to the country, and his own Democratic Party was so horrified by his performance that they refused to nominate him for a second term, making him the first sitting president to get dumped by his own party. But even Pierce's failures look small compared to our runner-up for worst president ever, Andrew Johnson. Taking over after Lincoln's assassination in 1865, Johnson was the worst possible person to lead the country during Reconstruction. A Southerner and former slave owner, he held deeply racist views. He once said, "This is a country for white men, and by God, as long as I am president, it shall be a government for white men." His main goal was to let the southern states back into the Union with as little pain as possible, for the white Southerners. He fought Congress on everything, vetoing laws meant to protect the rights of newly freed African Americans, including the Civil Rights Act of 1866. He even opposed the 14th Amendment, which grants citizenship to everyone born in the U.S. Congress. Got so fed up they impeached him, the first president to ever face that. He survived his trial by just 1 vote, but his presidency was over. Historians agree that Johnson's racist and stubborn approach to Reconstruction was a monumental failure that betrayed the entire meaning of the Civil War and crippled the fight for civil rights for 100 years. Section 4, the worst president in American history. And now we've arrived at the bottom. The man who historians, by an overwhelming and consistent vote, have named the single worst president in the history of the United States, James Buchanan. Serving from 1857 to 1861, James Buchanan's presidency was a 4-year masterclass in failed leadership right when the nation needed it most. He literally just watched as the country spiraled into the Civil War. His biggest failure? He was completely passive. Buchanan was a Northerner, but all his sympathies were with the South. He believed that even though states couldn't legally secede, the federal government had no power to stop them. So, as 7 southern states left the Union after Abraham Lincoln was elected, Buchanan did nothing. He just sat there, arguing that his hands were tied. His failures started way earlier. Just 2 days after he took office, the Supreme Court issued the Dred Scott decision, which said African Americans weren't citizens and slavery couldn't be banned in the territories. Instead of seeing how explosive this was, Buchanan supported it, hoping it would solve the slavery issue for good. It did the exact opposite. He also tried to force Kansas into the Union as a slave state against the will of the people living there. As the country fell apart around him, Buchanan seemed totally paralyzed. When South Carolina demanded he surrender Fort Sumter, he made a pathetic, failed attempt to send supplies, but otherwise did nothing, leaving the whole mess for Abraham Lincoln to clean up. In decades of surveys from places like C-SPAN and Siena College, James Buchanan is always at the absolute bottom. Historians on all sides agree his presidency was a complete disaster. It wasn't just bad policy, it was a total failure of moral courage. He watched the Union die and did nothing to save it. The legacies of these presidents are a powerful reminder that leadership matters a lot. From incompetence and corruption to a complete moral collapse, these are the stories of how it can all go wrong. But who do you think is the worst president in American history? Did we get the ranking right? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you want to see what happens when leadership goes right, check out our next video, The Most Underrated Presidents in American History. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into history. So, what's the recipe for presidential disaster? A few patterns stick out. First, a total inability to handle a crisis. Think Buchanan and secession, or Hoover and the Great Depression. Second, a massive moral failing, especially on slavery and civil rights, like with Pierce, Johnson, and Buchanan. And finally, a pattern of cronyism and just being completely unfit for the job, like Warren G. Harding. These presidents are more than just trivia questions. They are warnings. They show what happens when the person in the highest office lacks the courage, vision, or basic skill to lead. Their failures are a stark reminder of how fragile a country can be, and how much depends on who we choose to lead it. Thanks for watching.